Hello and welcome to Come to Think of It, the podcast diary program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Gerik No Deall, today's diarist. Welcome and thank you for joining me. Today, I want to talk about the adventure comedy cartoon show Rick and Morty. I recently got the chance to watch the entirety of season 1 of that show, which is my only first-hand experience of it up to this point, and I wanted to spend some time now giving my overall impression of what kind of show it is and how entertaining it can be. This will mainly involve me discussing and explaining and exploring the things about it that I liked and that I didn't like. So stick around. Believe it or not, but I never took any notice or interest, let alone became seriously invested, in Rick and Morty when it originally came out a few years ago. All the passionate and energetic fandom of my friends and colleagues passed me by like a ship in the night. And because of my particular TV watching habits, I never got the opportunity to watch an episode randomly by chance, which might have otherwise piqued my interest. So the show remained completely out of my orbit right up until very recently. Some of my friends and co-workers are very big fans of the show, who enjoy making lots of references and sharing lots of memes, and even doing some cosplay. They have sung very high praises of the show for being a very funny, entertaining, and addictive experience. But I more or less ignored them. They were talking about things that I didn't know about, for which I held no interest in their success or failure, so it didn't make any sense that I would invest any time and energy into this particular piece of pop culture. This was the state of affairs right up until a few weeks ago, when I was given the opportunity to watch season 1 of the show in a single sitting, every episode back to back. But I haven't watched season 2 yet, and so I thought that this might be a good opportunity for me to offer up my thoughts on the show with regards to what I've watched so far. I can now make an assessment regarding whether or not Rick and Morty is actually as good, or maybe even better, than the immense hype that my friends and co-workers have given it. And so, without further foundation building, here are my thoughts and criticisms of season 1 of Rick and Morty. One of my co-workers made the claim that in terms of telling unique, unusual, and untold stories, exploring strange and bizarre fantasy worlds that have rules and norms completely different to humans on Earth, and creating unorthodox creatures and monsters that test your rational thinking and comprehension, Rick and Morty are right up there with the best of them. They avoid the well-worn paths of stories of yesteryear with all the obvious plot devices and story tropes, and are the brave pioneers in the new and hitherto unexplored, trying to see just how far the plot can be bent before it completely snaps, comparable to the early seasons of Futurama. Well, I can now say for certain that that description is very apposite. Indeed, in every episode of Rick and Morty, there is some sort of attempt at introducing something that has never been seen before, whether it's in the form of a new alien world that Rick and Morty go visit, or the creatures that exist in that alien world, or one of Rick's inventions that allows them to do something unusual and amazing. Of the 11 episodes that comprise season 1, apart from episode 1 the pilot and episode 11 the season finale, every episode has something unique to say, explore, experience, or experiment with. That's a very high strike rate, all things considered. And yet, something that no one I've spoken to about the show has said to me, alongside that unorthodox style and queerness and uniqueness of storytelling and world building, Rick and Morty also has a very good sense of humour in terms of making references and parodies, taking some piece of pop culture that's been well and truly established and part of the furniture, and making fun of it in a clever, new and interesting way, trying to subvert and mutate it into some hideous other. The show also enjoys breaking the fourth wall now and then, but tries to do it in a way that hasn't been tried in other films or TV shows. It seems like with everything the show does, it tries to do it in a way that avoids the cliches and tropes, and tries to be as unique and creative as possible. In terms of the dialogue, the best parts of the show are the wild rants that both Rick and Morty occasionally launch into. It never reaches the level of overblown and ridiculous witty craziness of, say, Archer, but it's still very well written and can be very entertaining when done right. Morty's rants are very funny. By stressing a point again and again, hammering something home, while keeping his voice high-pitched and his words rambling, his rants end up being this terrifically funny yet poignant intervention into the scene. Morty sometimes verges on becoming someone who can look at the Rick and Morty world from the outside, almost sitting alongside the audience, looking at this fantasy world from the outside and speaking about it on their behalf, and can point out all its implausibility, calling out all the plot holes and inconsistencies, and drawing attention to how utterly crazy and stupid this whole thing actually is. On the other hand, Rick doesn't just have one kind of rant that he employs episode after episode, but he actually has 3, which are used at different times for different contexts throughout the season of episodes. First, he has the scientific technobabble kind of rant, where he'll just spout a bunch of fancy, nonsensical buzzwords, which make it sound as though they were pulled randomly from a physics and chemistry dictionary, which will help create a deus ex machina so that he can get out of any tight, difficult situation that the plot has placed him into. The same thing happens with his coat more generally, where he's able to simply pull out any device he needs in order to get out of any situation he finds himself. This seems to be a fairly obvious mockery of the Star Trek-esque trope of using science and technology in order to shift the plot in whatever direction is needed, without ever having to explain the rules of your universe or placing any external constraints on how these devices may or may not get used. So Rick and Morty appears to be making fun of any sci-fi show that doesn't bother constructing a holistic world of nature and technology that can exist independently of its characters, but instead simply moves the goalposts back and forth as is most convenient, which allows them to create these deus ex machina devices whenever necessary for the plot. Second, Rick has the drunk, slurring, slobbering rant, where he tries to insult people, advocate something within the plot to happen, or point out something that's happening around him. He'll start off by trying to say something, but as he moves on to his second and third sentence, he just can't think of the right words to say, can't actually build on his first sentence in the same way that Morty's rants can, and can't explain in detail what he's actually trying to get at. So he just ends up repeating himself again and again for the entire length of the rant, often going around in circles and getting nowhere, but slowly and clumsily. The whole thing just becomes this embarrassing and pointless mess, where Rick no longer appears like this eccentric, out-of-touch, unappreciated mad genius, but just your random drunk off the streets. This is where Archer is a superior show to Rick and Morty. In Archer, they were able to write these kinds of drunk, insult-ridden, nonsensical rants, and yet the actual content is carefully written in such a way that the rant still has direction, momentum, and a back-and-forth power play dimension to it. These slobbering rants in Rick and Morty don't come anywhere near the carefully written, witty, and humour of Archer, and instead they just eat up a couple of minutes of screen time without anything happening. And third, Rick has the telling truth to power, exposing the lies of the system rant. He'll point out something about the world that he doesn't like or doesn't approve of, pointing out some kind of problem or flaw with how society functions, which causes injustice or irrationality to continue in spite of people allowing it to happen. And often these will be just as poignant and ever-present in his world as they are in ours, making them touch home to the average viewer. It's during these occasions that Rick plays the foil to Gerik, who is the embodiment of hypocritical parental power, Jerry wants to present the world as liberal, stable, moral, and good, and he's never afraid of telling white lies and bending the truth in order to achieve that, trying his best to bend reality to fit his liberal worldview, making him the ultimate paternalistic interventionist bureaucrat. Rick will then step up to the plate, stripping away Jerry's lies, showing how the white lies hide the unpleasant truth about how the world actually works, and conclusively proving that society isn't stable, moral, or good, but actually filled with pain, immorality, chaos, and evil. Rick comes off as the most honest and genuine character of the show, because he doesn't try to pretend that something can happen in the world when it can't. And he won't try to deceive you into being happy for no reason. He would rather you face up to the problems in the world to actually be honest with yourself about how things aren't alright. And Rick appears totally opposed to a bureaucratic and paternalistic system which allows unaccountable power to be put in the hands of authority figures, while ordinary people like him just have to follow rules and colour within the lines. So if Jerry is the most dislikable character of the show, Rick is definitely the most likable. Among the 11 episodes of Rick and Morty Season 1, there is quite a lot of variety in terms of the plot structure, ways that characters are driven into certain actions, how plot devices are laid out so that the story is kept on track and moving forward, and how the environment is shaped in order to service the plot but appears natural and appropriate for the characters as they live their everyday lives inside and operate through that world. So the storyline for each episode is unique and its own creation. There is certainly not one or two story models that are being used and reused with each new episode, and there is no cookie cutter system in place for deciding how an episode is meant to be structured. One question to ask is, how long can this actually last? As more and more episodes of the show get made, through Season 2 and into Season 3, more and more of the Rick and Morty universe will become introduced, explored, and cogently established, providing more concrete structure to this fantasy world. And with more information, everything begins to take on more structure, logic, and predictability. The shock value disappears once everything has been eventually introduced to the viewer. At that point, what will the writers do? Will they continue to establish more and more of the world in the same way that the series has so far, making the world less shocking and indescribable, and more understandable and predictable? Or will they try to break the laws of the universe that they've so far established, subverting expectations of Rick and Morty itself for characters and plot lines, and try to introduce new materials which change how we understand the show from a meta-narrative point of view? It won't be until I've watched Season 2 of the show that I'll be able to answer that question. So in summary, I enjoyed watching Season 1 of Rick and Morty. It stands far, far above the quality that you would normally expect from a typical, randomly selected comedy-adventure cartoon show coming out of America in this era. But I haven't become infatuated by it. The show might be good, but it isn't at that platinum standard comparable to the early Simpsons, early Futurama, or Archer. It's not AAA, but probably more AA, comparable to the best of Adventure Time, Steven Universe, or the early SpongeBob SquarePants. And that's all the time we have for today. After I've watched Season 2 of Rick and Morty, I'll probably make another episode to give my thoughts and opinions and observations of what I've seen so far. But until then, this has been Come to Think of It on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Gerik No Deall. Thanks for listening to the program. Until next time, goodbye.